an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, chapters 9, 10, and 11. In these chapters, I have never been so interested to hear people's theses, which really means that I'm getting old. It really means that I'm getting old. I literally was reading this chapter with the presentation going, we don't need all of this play acting. Come on, just say what it is you're here for, dude. Stop with the theatrics. I'm old. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thank you to Kyle for commissioning this episode, jumping in there to make sure I got another dose of Wall of Storms before the... this was a Saturday spot that unexpectedly opened up when I decided to do away with the Unspoiled Book Club. And it was going to be a little bit of a wait between the last chapters and the next ones. So I'm glad that Kyle was able to get in there and book this one because I really do enjoy this book. But it looks like it's going to be a big one. And the slow going, I was just like, man, this is going to take a while. So these chapters, guys, the Palace Examination, Chapter 9, the third month in the 6th year of the reign of 4 placid seas. There is a POV from King Cato, who is Kuni's brother. And it's an interesting thing because I would like to see more from his perspective. We get a little bit more of him again later. But he is aware, as is his wife, that he has only been given the position that he has because his father urged Kuni to do it, like, on his deathbed, basically. And it's like he is aware of the fact that his brother is still kind of resentful of him and the way that he behaved when Kuni was young and getting into all kinds of trouble. It is, however, it's not lost on his wife that Kuni was like definitely not really seeming like somebody who had a lot of integrity. Like, we know that from reading the early chapters about what Kuni was like, we know that he was definitely somebody who cared about like the well-being of people in terms of not wanting them to like get beaten by guards in the middle of the street. But we also know that he was like low-key strong-arming a woman who owned a bar into giving him free shit because he was just so entertaining that people were at her bar for him. And, you know, it's understandable why his brother and his brother's wife sort of pulled back on helping this guy. I can't really be that mad at them. Like, it's one of those things that I think Kuni is genuinely a good dude and wants the best for people and is intelligent and sees talent and does not get hung up on the quote identity politics, to call it by a term that I hate, of who is speaking to him. You know, Jin or Gin, depending on how you say her name, is a woman, and he still was like, all right, talk to me. What are you thinking? Like, he was still open to hearing her. And that's important. But that does not mean that when he was younger, he always made good decisions. That doesn't mean that people were, should have seen the, potential in him when he was just running around, like, ripping people off. So I feel like I'm glad that his father kind of stumped for Cato and was just like, dude, you really need to do something for your brother. Because it doesn't seem like Cato's a bad guy. it seemed like he just, was trying to distance himself from a brother that seemed like he was getting into some bad shit, which he was, to be honest. But he understands now that his brother is pretty talented, and later on is even like admiring of the way that he's handling a couple of different things. And so I'm glad that Kuni has elevated him, even if it doesn't seem like it was, quote, deserved. This is somebody who I feel like probably has empathy more than other rulers. And, we need people like that. And she asks him, his wife, Tete, asks, is Kuni satisfied these days? And what she means is he happy with the way that you're running things as king of your own little kingdom? But he doesn't really hear the actual question that she's asking. He thinks that she means in general. And he starts talking about the fact that Kuni is delaying naming a crown prince, and that this has caused factions to rise between Rosanna and Gia. And this is something that we already knew about, but it says the generals and nobles prefer Firo, while the ministers and the College of Advocates prefer Timu. And the thing is, reading into these next chapters, it's very clear Timu is not a good choice. Like, not that Timu is not a good kid. It's not even that he's unintelligent. Intelligent is such a broad term that it's not really a fair assessment of everything. But Timu has a certain amount of knowledge and learning that progresses in a very linear fashion. He does not come up with his own ideas or read between the lines or understand nuance or think in the underhanded way that you need to in order to be effective in politics. You need to not only think underhandedly for your own benefit, but you need to be able to anticipate the tricks, basically, to use a bald term for it, that other people are going to try and play on you, and the traps that they may lay and whatever. And he is not showing himself to be adept at this. Now, it's not like he's fully grown. And it's not like this is not something you can learn at all. I don't want to say that how he behaves now as a child is indicative of who he will be as an adult. But it doesn't feel promising. And the fact that the other kids seem to be catching on a little bit better than him, especially his sister, who is apparently not an option, but maybe she will be anyway. It feels that there are other options of kids who are better at this, and Timu maybe can grow to be better. But if we're going to have to pick somebody now, I don't want to pick him, So he says the smart thing for us to do is to take the allowance Kuni pays us and stay out of sight. We'll have our pleasures and let him run things the way he wants to. Ra Olu, my regent in Dasu, is the real governor of the island, and he reports directly to Kuni. I know nothing, and I prefer it that way. So Kato, honestly, you could sort of look down on him for this, and I would understand that, of him just being like, yeah, I'll take the title, but I don't really have any interest in doing anything. At the same time, though, it's not like he has a lot of background in this, and I appreciate if somebody else is better at a job, letting them actually take the lead. However, I'm not totally sure that the people that he has chosen are, I don't know them. So whether or not they are people with integrity or the best interests of the people in mind, that remains to be seen. So yeah, he talks about how they're coming here because his presence is required because of the imperial household needs to appear harmonious, and we need to put on a good show for everybody, that we are all at peace with one another. So then we find out exactly how this works. Although the top 100 scoring examinees were given the rank of Firoa, and all could theoretically participate in the palace examination, only the top 10, honored with the designation of Panameji, were actually given the chance to do so. The rest would be assigned to a civil service pool where they would be matched with ministers and generals in need of junior staff, and these assignments would hopefully launch them into a glorious career in government service. Now, I really want to know how this works. How do you say, yeah, the top 100 are totally all going to be able to do this thing? Not really, though. Only 10 of you. Like, what do they mean technically they're able to, but in practice they're not? How technical is that? Does it mean that if they really pushed it, they could also do it, but people don't like to push because it looks bad? I'm super duper curious about what exactly this means and how this came to work this way. Like, did they used to have a full month basically of listening to the theses of these different people, and they were just like, this is too fucking long, and by the end of the month the poor emperor has forgotten what the fuck he heard on the first of the month, so we need to cut this back, you know? Like, I'm just very interested in how this has all come to pass and be the way that it is. So we find out about the whole presentation of the court here, and this is one of those things that I feel like it'd be really easy to sort of skim. And I started to skim because it's a lot of descriptions of people's clothing and the way that they're sitting. But it actually occurred to me as I was reading it that we have not really seen this sort of ritual from Kuni since he became emperor. And I'm not going to call him Emperor Regin because that's not who he is to me. He's Kuni. I'm just going to always call him that. But he is, he's always been somebody who's very informal, and we get some insight into exactly what has led him to this point. So it turns out that, like, being informal and having sort of a more familiar relationship with the people who are technically your subordinates is much more acceptable during war. There needs to be a real level of trust there that sort of behavior and approach to relationships establishes when you are dealing with life and death situations. And everybody was much more willing to give him a pass as to the way that he behaved and as to the way that his friends and those he placed in positions of power behaved when we were in the middle of a crisis and an emergency. People just weren't paying attention to this stuff. But it's peacetime now. And there are people who have been the nobility watching the way that he functions and realizing that the folks that he has put in these positions of power are showing their asses a little bit, really like betraying the fact that they do not come from nobility by having really terrible table manners or by just like playing around with, like, it's described at one point that they like do like play sword fights and stuff with like the chopsticks that they're meant to be using to actually eat, and in fact are eating with their hands. There's a lot of like talking to one another in really informal ways, and like even the way that people enter and exit the audience rooms is kind of not taken as seriously as a lot of people think it should be. And Kuni, understandably, isn't that interested. Like, that's what happens when you come into a position like this via war and via a desire to really do something real. Because he did not overthrow Mapidere and later his son. He didn't do this because he really is like, I am the guy to rule everything. It turned out that way. But really what it was just you're being horrible. You're a bad person for the job, and you're going to ruin everyone's lives. And clearly, I guess I have to step in because nobody else is going to fucking do it. So he comes into it with that sort of attitude of just like, who fucking cares if I eat with my hands? Are you guys still being beaten in the streets and starving to death? No. So fuck off. Who cares? But the truth is, people care. And that's the thing about politics. And it's been something that he has managed to sidestep because the common people were often on his side. And that was really what he needed, because it was about armies. It was about having the bulk of the population on his side. But now in peacetime, it becomes a different game altogether. And it's about making the people in power happy while keeping a balance of not making them happy at the expense of the common people whom you were allegedly doing all of this to help. And so he's in this like place where he has to worry about the nobles, who maybe some of these nobles are a little bit resentful of the fact that he is putting people that they don't think belong in these positions above them. And the fact that these folks don't have refined manners or understanding of the sages, or they don't know certain rituals and the significance behind them, they think it's sort of laughable. It's not even just that they hold these people in contempt. I don't even think it's that simple. I think it's more of just like, can you believe these people? And not being taken seriously is simply not acceptable. You can't convince people to support your cause and do what you say if they don't really respect you. So he winds up calling in this guy. And I'm going to try and find exactly where this is. Who he has been told is out there like writing treatises, kind of talking shit about him. And he is told that he should bring this person in to get an overview of the way things are functioning in the palace and begin new traditions and rituals, and bring in some older things that are ancient, and essentially give everybody etiquette lessons and smooth out all of the behavior and mannerisms of common people with common backgrounds to be a little bit more regal and impressive. And the guy's name is Zato Ruthie. And, you know, he's brought into this, and he's actually, as much as he's talking shit about Kuni, when they offer him this position, he's very happy with it. And it says, coming up with the protocols for the new imperial court to him seemed a task far more important than the mere minutiae like running an army or devising tax policies. The sort of tasks better relegated to people like Jin Mazzotti, whom he grudgingly accepted as a colleague, and Kogo Yelu. After all, the imperial courtly protocols would be the model of proper behavior for lesser courts, and the learned, who would be exemplars for the masses. In this way, he had a chance to sculpt the soul of the people of Dara in accordance with moralist ideas. So, yeah, this dude is absolutely a disaster. Like, disaster is too strong a word, but like his priorities are all fucked. Like, let's be honest. If you're just like, tax policies, armies, how many steps should people be taking till they get to the throne? You're a psycho. And you just, what are you even doing? Kyle says, remember he was the guy that got absolutely punked by Jin in the first book. I don't remember that. Kyle, how do you have two different sign-ins? Was that previous Kyle also you? The river crossing guy. Oh, that guy. Oh, he says he was on mobile. Okay. I did not remember that. I knew the name was familiar, but so many of the times that I've seen certain names, I'm just like, this seems familiar, but it might just sound like another name. So yeah, this dude is... he gets a little bit too intense with it. And when he unrolls the scroll for the protocols, it stretches halfway down the grand audience hall. And Kuni is like, dude, look, this is a necessary thing that I'm having you do. But you need to understand that these are regular people that are not familiar with behaving in these ways. You need to start with the fucking basics that they can actually learn. I don't have time to subject them to a year of study just so that they know where to stand and sit and what to say in response to what. I can't have this. And he's tries to be like, you haven't even tried. And Kuni's like, I don't need to try. Look at this. Look at how long this is. This is insanity. And when Kuni breaks it down and makes something more simple, Zato is like, what? Are you kidding me? This? You hired me to come in here and you're going to hand me this and be like, how about this? What? And he says, where are the model walks designed to cultivate the soul? Where are the quotations from the sages to guide debates? It's like something taken out of a folk opera to please an audience snacking on sunflower seeds and candied monkey berries. I love the fact that he says this, and privately Kuni's like, well, I did take it from folk operas, but shut up, whatever. It's so good. Like, Kuni is so not into this that he has to pretend that this is all a play because that's the only way that he can take it seriously, is by acting like none of this is real. You know what? I think that's like the best way to approach stuff like this. It is a play, right? Like when it sort of reminds me of, to take a weird example, Beyonce. She talks about in an interview like years ago at this point, Sasha Fierce, one of her albums is named Sasha Fierce. Sasha Fierce is a sort of, identity that she takes on when she walks out on stage. She feels like she herself, Beyonce, is different, a different person than the one that walks out on stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And it's amazing that even somebody with the confidence and skill and talent that Beyonce has feels that way and has to do something like that in order to sort of psych herself up and distance herself from who she believes she is, which I mean, it just goes to show that no matter what, we all have different hats we put on, right? So it's really hard sometimes to separate those things, and you have to come up with distinctive personas. And that's not a bad method. It's actually a really smart way to approach things when this does not come naturally to you, when you are not somebody who was brought up with these traditions and thus takes them seriously in your bones. You have to come up with a way to make yourself believe. And this is a good way to do it. Back and forth, the emperor and the master of rituals debated, trying to compromise on something that had enough formality to satisfy the desire for propriety by the old nobles and scholars, and also contained enough fun to be accepted by the emperor and his wartime companions. So one of the main things is that the examples that Ruthie is showing him, Kuni is the only one seated. Everybody else is standing. And he's not only seated, he has seated, like, this actually doesn't wind up being what Ruthie is recommending to Kuni, but Ruthie is basing this on an example in which Mapidere had been seated in a very informal position with his legs stretched out in front of him. And there's Thakrido, which is legs stretched out in front. There's Guepa, which I believe is like seated what we call, unfortunately, Indian style. There's got to be a better way to say that. I think people often say seated with legs crossed, but I always think of that as in a chair with your legs crossed. Like I don't think of that as the right. You could say lotus position, I guess. Is that? But and then there is Mapirari, I think is the way, Miparari. And that's where they are sort of kneeling and they're like seated up on their heels, kneeling. And it's a very stiff, uncomfortable posture, but considered formal. And seated in the credo is, even for Ruthie, with like, even though Emperor Mapidere did it that way, Ruthie's like, I'm not going to have you do that. That's a little bit too much. But I do think that you should be seated and everybody else should stand because it sets you apart. And Kuni is like, dude, I can't justify like setting myself apart that much when I depend on all of these people. I might be the head of the state, as he puts it, but they're the arms and legs. It makes no sense to pamper the head and torment the body. Formal court should model harmony among all the people of Dara. In this audience hall, we debate and decide the fate of the people as a whole, not just my personal preferences and dislikes. And Ruthie, who had been coming at this, like, kind of expecting some pushback from Kuni, which he's getting, but he kind of expected, I think, to not like Kuni, hears this and is like, oh shit, you know what? I like that. You are obviously like caring about morals and all of us getting along and taking on the opinions and opposing ideals of other people and considering them in a real way. That bodes well. I like this. He would try to be more flexible and serve this interesting lord. So I really enjoy this. And so Kuni and Ruthie worked together for weeks designing courtly regalia, or as Kuni thought of them, costumes and props, formal speeches, scripts, and etiquette protocols, blocking. They debated long into the night and used up reams of paper with rough sketches, frequently calling for midnight snacks and herbal drinks prepared by the Empress that kept the mind alert, until the final result reflected Kuni's vision without offending moralist traditions too much. Kuni was willing to suffer for his art. The formal robe and crown took time to put on, even with servants, and the regalia forced him to kneel stiffly in uncomfortable miparari. But the example set by the emperor ended any complaints from the unruly generals. Everyone put on the stiff robe, ceremonial armor, and heavy official headgear and knelt up in miparari. So, yeah, this is kind of a cool thing. Like, I just like that this writer is so interested in the... what do you call it? In the way that your whole approach to governing will have to change from wartime to peacetime. So yeah, the way that this is described is really wild. Emperor Reagan sat in full court regalia, bright red imperial robes adorned with hundreds of golden crubins playing with dandelions and exquisite embroidery depicting rearing waves and various lesser creatures of the sea. The flat-top crown with a curtain of 7 strands of cowrie shells dangled from the front, obscuring his facial expressions from the viewer, and another curtain of 7 strands of corals hanging in the back for balance. He knelt up in the formal position of miparari on the throne, a gilt ironwood sitting board overlaid with cushions stuffed with lavender, mint, and other mind-clearing spices formulated by the Empress, the most well-known herbalist of the empire. Speaking of whom, Empress Gia sat to the left, Consort Rosanna sat to the right, both in formal court robes, made of thick red silk the color of Dasu, the island from which Kunigaru had begun his journey. Gia's were decorated with dandelion-mouthing deerins, while Rosanna's were decorated with carp-derived motifs in honor of her home island of Arulugi. So it goes on like this, descriptions of exactly what everybody is wearing, the colors, what is embroidered on them, where they are seated, and, you know, exactly how everybody is arranged in the room. And I love this description of the people who come in who are part of the army. Let's see, here it is. Yeah. In contrast to the ministers and governors, these individuals, who obtained their positions mainly through wartime service, were dressed in ceremonial armor made of lacquered wood and wore decorative swords on their belts made of coral, perfumed paper, or fine porcelain. After all, other than the palace guards, no one was allowed to bring a functioning weapon into the palace, much less the grand audience hall. So I think that sounds so cool. Like, I would love to see what wooden armor, ceremonial armor looks like, and also coral swords, perfumed paper swords. Like, what? I'm dying to know what that looks like, you know? Because it could be easily very ridiculous, but I imagine that they're actually probably really beautiful. And then we have Gin, who does have an actual sword. She's the one who is allowed to carry one. And of course, poor Kado, who is wearing ceremonial armor, but he's kind of too fat for it to really fit properly. Bless him. So there is this I love this because Kuni is just, it's not even that he's not interested. It's that he has a very particular line of interest that he wants to hear people talking about for their theses. And the very first person to get up and talk is somebody that's like focusing on something we've already heard him not give a shit about. So the imperial tutor, Zato Ruthie, stands up. I wish to present to you the panamagia of this session of the grand examination. And he's, let's see. To the side, King Cato shifted imperceptibly on his knees and gazed at the imperial tutor. He was thinking of the complaining Kashima he had run into on the way here. This old man may soon find out how much trouble he's in. So, yeah, this, I didn't really mention this because I was focused on Cato's, like, or Cato. I'll call him Cato Kalin. I didn't really talk about the fact that he was stuck in a sort of a traffic jam on his way in. But what is going on is that there are a lot of people who are bitter about the fact that they were not accepted, that they were not graded higher on their essays. And this isn't like an SAT where you just fill in bubbles and there are right and wrong answers. I mean, there is, I guess, essay portions of SATs, but that's all this is. It's a very subjective thing. And a lot of them seem to believe that they are not being taken seriously because they don't have the right connections or tone. And the fact that their tone gives away that they are common or whatever, you know, there's a lot of suspicion surrounding the way that this test functions. And of course, to a degree, people are just going to complain and be bitter that they didn't get picked. And that's just, you can't avoid that. But fucking Zato winds up blurting out something a little bit later about how Kitathu, who is the first student presenter, and I keep calling them students, it's not exactly accurate, but it's fine. He mentions being like, oh yeah, I thought that I could sense something noble in the way that you did your logograms. And it's obviously meant to just be like, they're really beautiful, you did a good job. But it, to people who are currently a little bit paranoid about nobles taking more than their fair share, it sounds like he's saying, I picked you because I sensed that you had noble blood. And I'm giving preference to people of noble blood, whether subconsciously or consciously. And that is going to blow back probably if this gets repeated outside of this room, which it almost definitely will. There's a lot of people here. So Zato is, and he knows the mistake that he made. The instant he says it, he's like, fuck, and tries to sort of, you know, recover himself, but it's too late. It's been said. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing with politics is you can't unring a bell. Once you say shit, it's out there. It's on record. So he says, his essay was composed in an exquisite hand. The calligraphy calls to mind the best works of the late King Kosugi. Though his passion is the study of mathematics, his essay proposed a reform of the schools of Dara to emphasize the works of Konfiji. Silence. Not a single murmur of admiration could be heard in the hall. Cato frowned. That sounds like the most boring proposal for reform I can imagine. Either this young examinee knows how to weave a dazzling pattern out of plain threads like a skilled lace-maker of Gone, or else Zato Ruthie just revealed even more evidence of bias by giving high marks to a kid who knows only how to recite musty books by the moralist's favorite sage. You know, I mean, we already know that Zato Ruthie is a little bit too predisposed to ancient texts that don't necessarily hold a lot of relevance today. This is a thing. When you have very subjective judging, this is going to happen. And it's understandable why we try and do so many standardized tests. It's just, you know, there's not a good way to test people at large. It's difficult. The emperor only gazed steadily at the young man. Are you related to King Kosugi? Cato sat up straighter, as did the others in the hall. Interesting. The young man bowed deeply. Renga, you speak the honored name of my grand-uncle. He was a calm man in troubled times. Kita nodded non-committally. The emperor's words could be taken as either a compliment or a criticism. Kasugi had generally been thought of as among the least effective of the Tiro kings during the rebellion against the Zana Empire, and his restored Han had been the first state on the Big Island to fall to the armies of Emperor Reagan. It was best not to dwell on that history. Awkward. And this is when Ruthie blurts out, yeah, I thought I knew that you were noble. Dum-dum. So Kuni says, you observed in your essay that the current administration of Dara is impossible to sustain over the long term. Can you review the argument for me? And this is when we see some real admiration from Cato over the way that Kuni decided to handle this. Of course he would state the argument of the essay in the most generic way possible, disguising its real bite. This way, he distances himself from Kita Thu in the event that the emperor is displeased with the argument, and that lavish praise of Thu's handwriting just lays the groundwork for more deniability if necessary. He could always claim to have been overwhelmed by the form rather than the substance of what was written. Once again, Cato was glad he stayed away from Kuni's court as much as possible. The grand audience hall was a deep pool whose tranquil surface hid powerful currents and countercurrents beneath, and made a careless swimmer could be easily pulled in and never able to get out. I really like this. Like, maybe Cato isn't super good at the job that he is meant to do, but he at least has the awareness to know that he is out of his depth, so to speak, and I appreciate that. So we cut from Kita being like, yes, I'm going to present my argument, to a room right behind the throne. And the kids, like Timu, Thera, and Firo, come inside thinking that they are going to be able to spy on the proceedings alone. But it turns out that Soto is in there. Lady Soto, whom you will remember as being a confidant and like the awesome old woman who takes no shit. And she is basically like, well, if you're going to come in and listen, then fucking get over here. We'll jump back to that later. We cut to chapter 10 here, which is called The Balloon Ride. Somewhere over the sea north of Crescent Island, the first year in the reign of 4 placid seas, 5 years before the first grand examination. Now, I'm realizing as we do this, as a reader, what I think this author is going to do, and I'm extremely curious how long this is going to keep up. But I believe we are going to be spending several chapters in a row jumping between presentations from students of their arguments and theses, and then going back in time to find out what was going on with Zomi and her education. And I enjoy that idea, and I am super duper interested in what the other theses are. But also, this is something that you could literally do for the rest of the book because of, like, you know, I mean, there's only 10 theses, sure, but you could draw that out plenty. And I just am extremely wary of exactly how long this is going to go on. I don't know if we're going to get into every thesis. I don't know if, you know, we might skip some or get like an overview of what was done or whatever. Or we may get really involved. Who knows? But anyway, they're riding in a balloon called the Curious Turtle, which is adorable. And Zomi is getting an education in how to steer and control this balloon, which is different than the basically zeppelins that are controlled with the gas that is siphoned out of the volcanic fissures. This is a hot air balloon. It's using heated air. It's just an extremely different way of traveling that you don't have a lot of control over. So when she keeps asking, like, well, where are we going? He's just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, you can't really be too married to a destination. when you travel this way, because you are at the whim of whatever the wind is doing. And I am extremely curious if he has any sort of plan at all, or if this truly is just wandering. Who knows, but it's really fun that she's in a balloon. Like, how wild is this? Have you guys ever ridden in a hot air balloon? Because I haven't. I would love to. It's extremely expensive, but it sounds so rad, right? Wouldn't you love to do that? And it's funny because I'm somebody who's afraid of heights, but that is not something that I think would bother me, because it would feel like we're in a basket where it feels very secure versus like a cliff's edge where it feels like you could fall. I don't know whether you could say fear of heights or fear of falling, or like they're not exactly the same thing. And I wonder sometimes if it's more about falling for me than the height. But yeah, they finally spot a crewbin that comes up out of the water, and it's humongous, and she's never seen one before. The colossal fish suspended for a moment in the air, and it says it was clearly many times the size of the hot air balloon they were riding in, which is so bonkers. Like, I just thinking of the hot air balloons that we have now. If I saw a whale that was like 3 times the size of that, that's a big deal. And I've seen whales, but I would put them maybe a shade larger than a hot air balloon. Not 2-3 times. That's crazy. And she is absolutely enraptured. And it's so cute because Luan is remembering the first time that he saw one as a boy. And he starts to get really teary-eyed and nostalgic. And this is some shit that starts to happen, guys. Like, I am just starting to reach a point in my life where I see what kids or teens are going through, and I'm like, wow, I remember this moment in my life, and have a distance that makes it feel like almost it happened to somebody else. And you just have this sort of emotional response, that it's like, I just love this. He is remembering his father and seeing one for the first time when he was on a boat. And he asks his father how he knows so much about the world. And his father says, by following curiosity, the quality that Lutho prizes above all. Will I ever know as much as you? You will know much more than I do, Lutika. It is the natural flow of the universe that sons should exceed their fathers and students shall surpass their teachers. Can we get a closer look? Asked Zomi eagerly. Maybe, Luan said, and he swallowed the lump in his throat and turned away to hide the fact that his eyes were wet. Oh, guys, I love it so much. It's so sweet. Like, it's things like that are really the only reason that I could ever understand wanting to have kids, is to have those moments where you kind of get to relive something. And I love later on when she has another moment of like deep excitement and is laughing. It says Luan felt at once very old and also very young as he laughed along with Zomi. That's exactly what it is. You relive your childhood in a way, and it's this beautiful, exciting moment that you get back for a second. But then at the same time, you feel old because it's not entirely unfamiliar. And your perception and perspective has changed so much that there's a whole other layer and patina of like regret or longing or sadness that is overlaying the joy. And it's really beautiful, but very difficult as well. And life is that way. It's oftentimes layers of beauty and joy, and then it's interspersed with sadness and loss, and that's what makes it what it is. And we all wish that we just got joy, or at least if there was any sadness, that they're as thin a layer as possible, but we don't get to pick that. We can do the best we can with what we get, but we don't have control over our lives after a point. And I just really thought that this was written in a way that gets that across beautifully, and it's very touching. So yeah, he is showing her how to steer things, and then we get to Zomi taking a nap, and she has this dream, which I believe is more like a memory of leaving her mother. And Aki, it's her mother, is packing up some food with her to take, and is talking to Luan, who's like, listen, I know this is hard, but I am going to take very good care of her. She's extremely talented, and she needs to see the world to be able to make the most of what brains she's been given. And her mom is like, listen, I know she's special, and I've known that. I've wanted to keep her at home, but really that was selfish. I just have lost so many people that I care about that I couldn't bear to part with her. But also, I can't keep her here for myself. And I love this line. You're my daughter, but you do not belong to me. The only duty any child owes to her parent is to live a life that is true to her nature. I wish so much that more parents understood that their children do not belong to them. It's an attitude that is a bit of a holdover from times where children were treated as property, especially female children were treated as a thing to be traded for power and alliances and whatever. Men were too, but it was like you were in much more of a position of power with a son than you were with a daughter. And there are so many parents to this day that treat their children as if anything that child does is their business. And it's really a violation of such basic privacy. And I wish that those parents would understand the complex that they give to their kids when they invade their privacy over and over again, or keep them from doing the things that are important to them. There is just something so not just selfish, but cruel about treating another human being as if they owe you anything. You can, I'm sure, to a degree, not avoid feeling that a little if you raised a child. But whether or not that feeling is sort of a reaction is irrelevant. You have to learn to control your reaction and understand that they are their own person. They aren't going to think the same things you think. They may reflect your opinions, but that doesn't mean that they are not capable of forming their own. And I really love the fact that she specifically says that. You're my daughter, but you do not belong to me. So good. So then we get into her lessons, and she wakes up and she sees she sees Luan playing with this weird contraption on her leg. She saw Luan sitting at the other end of the gondola with his legs stretched out in front of him. He had some contraption made of sticks and bundles of ox sinew wrapped around his right calf, and as he flexed his leg, the contraption made the rhythmic noise she had heard. "What's that, teacher?" Startled, Luan stopped flexing his leg and looked over at Zomi. "Oh, nothing. Go back to sleep. I'll wake you to steer the balloon in a few hours." I am guessing that this might be a contraption meant for physical therapy for Zomi's leg. I am not positive of this. It might even be something that's like a brace meant to help her walk a little bit more easily. But it feels pretty clear that it's something he intends her to use at some point, and he just doesn't really want to get her hopes up about it. So we'll see what winds up happening with that, because that doesn't come up again in this chapter. And Zomi is studying, and she's like really bored with doing these logograms. She's writing Zindari letters. Sorry, logograms are a little bit more complex, and they take several letters and are just like the next level. And she wants to get onto logograms way, way soon. And Luan is like, "Girl, no, you've got to learn classical Ano. And even then, it's going to take you years to master logograms." To which she's like, "If it's going to take years, then let's start right now. What the fuck?" And he says girl, no, I don't know how to tell you this, but your handwriting is real bad. You need to do this so that it's like neat and looks beautiful. To which she's like, who the fuck cares what it looks like? My words mean something. And that should be the only thing that matters, is what they mean. And he has to explain to her the way that you choose to present something matters. Like, as much as we wish the world functioned solely on spirit and meanings and essence, that's not the truth. We see things a certain way based on the method in which it is presented to us. And it gives an impression. And you are not giving a good impression with your handwriting here, crowding everything in unevenly. People will stop and read what you wrote if it's written beautifully. They will pay more attention because it's gotten their attention in another way. And this is like a really important thing in general in life. And I mean, if any of you are in the chat and you see this room, you know that the aesthetic is like my jam. I am very into how things look. And I used to judge myself a lot for that and feel like I was so superficial. And I really gradually came to accept that about myself, that I love beauty. I think that things being beautiful is one of the joys of life, that we get to experience beauty. And if you have the choice between making something beautiful or just throwing it together and it's nothing, why would you not choose to make it beautiful? Maybe it's a little bit more effort. And I'm saying that very with like the awareness in mind that I'm saying a little bit more effort. It doesn't take a ton to basically exponentially increase the attractiveness of a thing. And we tend to associate trying to make things look better in this day and age with really dramatic, unhealthy methods, especially when it comes to personal appearance, eating disorders and drastic plastic surgery and whatever. But it doesn't have to be that way. All it could be is you drink enough water so that your skin looks good, which mine doesn't right now. You could, care for yourself enough that you make your hair look nice today. Little things that just raise your spirits. And that's something that I have really understood for myself, that when I am going through a deep sadness, making myself look nice and dressing up and putting on makeup feels like the last thing I want to do, but it always raises my spirits and does make me feel a little bit better. And I love that he gets that across to her here, because she's having a hard time understanding that it's not just this is the way the world works, because that makes it sound like such a chore. It is something that you should also enjoy and appreciate. And it's not just for other people, and it's not false. I think that's part of what makes her feel a little bit of resistance to this, is this idea that she has, her disability, and she's very worried about people judging her based on just how she looks and having this disability. Totally understandable, right? And she's worried that she's going to have to fake that she can walk normally in order for people to take her seriously. That's clearly part of what's on her mind right here. And he knows that. He kind of sees it. And it's that's not what I mean. It's simply the way you choose to stand or look at somebody or hold your head is just as important. That's stuff that you have control over, and people know that. So I really like this sort of argument that they get into. And Luan is watching her. He says, let's see, are you suggesting, because she says, this reminds me of carving the lucky cakes for the High Autumn Festival. Mama always said I was too impatient to make the pretty patterns in the pastry before baking, but at least there you get something delicious at the end. Are you suggesting I get you some sticky rice flour so you can make edible word squares? Luan asked sarcastically. Zomi looked up. Oh, that would be great. Teacher, can we? Can we? If we get some honey, I'll make a cone out of paper and cut off the tip so I can write the Zindari letters using the dripping honey, and we can get some lotus seeds and coconut shavings. If you put as much energy into practicing your letters as you do into dreaming up new foods, you'd have mastered proper handwriting by now. Zomi glared at him for a moment, lowered her eyes, and went back to writing. Her hand moved across the slate very, very slowly. Luan sighed again. Not every mind learns the same way. A knife needs to be sharpened against stone, but a pearl needs to be polished with soft cloth. I found infinite joy and comfort in the solitude of repetitious drilling and practice, but perhaps a different method is needed for this one. Again, love it. Like everybody does learn in different ways, and motivating with food isn't the worst thing, which he winds up talking about a little bit later. So yeah, he is discussing like patternism for a little while and the way that you can sense what direction the wind is moving in. And then he talks about, what is the other philosophy that talks about, here it is. The incentivists believe that people are by nature lazy and resist change, and it is the duty of the wise ruler to incentivize them with proper rewards and punishments. So you adjust laws to encourage the right behavior. And she's like, that seems really harsh. And he's like, it can be if you are doing it badly. And you just have to know how to balance it and make sure that you don't light such a fire that the pot boils over. And I really enjoyed all of these conversations between the two of them. So this chapter moves into 11, the Kruben Wolf. And here we get Kitathu's presentation. There is this whole song and dance with props and costumes and all of these different animals. It's just not necessary, as I said. It's fine that this is like meant to be impressive and get attention and whatever. But what it comes down to is that he has a lot of different monsters that are made out of parts, like two different parts of these like noble animals. So there's like something that's got the back half of a wolf, but the front of a Kruben. And that's the first one that comes to mind. And there are others and he makes sure to combine the two parts of the animal that are like the least effective and impressive. So obviously a wolf's advantage is its teeth and it's being able to smell things and its excellent sight, but using the back half of the wolf is not effective. So he comes down to it and says, you have divided the lands and ruled them through a bureaucracy loyal only to yourself. The Tiro kings had relied on hereditary nobles to handle the duties of administration. You took a path different from both of those systems. Half of your lands have been given to nobles, who maintain some measure of independence, and the other half you administer directly through your governors. In this way, you have gained the disadvantages of both and have the advantages of neither. And what he's saying is, I think you should restore the Tiro system completely. You should bring back just kings and have them functioning like governing their own lands. And all of them are loyal to you as a sovereign, but you are not actually in direct control over anything. He's basically proposing states' rights is essentially the vibe here. He's a Republican. Okay. So the problem here is that Kuni is very invested in having hands-on influence and being able to put his foot down on things. And this is not appealing to him at all. Like, this kid, it's understandable where he's coming from, especially considering he's of noble birth and would be invested in this idea. But Kuni asks him about the armies, and this kid's like, yeah, every king would have his own army. You would not have an army because you are dealing with the like moral and philosophical questions, and you wouldn't be involved in war. Wrong answer to a king who got into power in the first place by being a warrior, and who owes where he is completely to common people who have been elevated due to war and their abilities in war. This kid is like dead in the water. I don't know what he's thinking coming to Kuni with this. And the fact that what's his face, the high tutor, thought that this was going to work at all. Dude, not good. And Kyle says it also ignores the fact that most nobles are actually scum. Exactly. Like, this kid is trying to act like, well, anybody who's a bureaucrat can game the system to get more than his fair share. But nobles know that they don't have to rely on the system to keep their position. They will have it because of bloodline. So they are more interested in the morality of doing things because they aren't worried about being like voted out, essentially. No, dude. People are greedy. End of story. Where that greed comes from doesn't matter. Whether you're a noble who has to rely on this, like on what you do to keep your position, doesn't change the fact that you can still game it and take from people and completely exploit. Like, what are you talking about? But of course, he is a noble and he's going to say it this way. And the kids, meanwhile, that are behind the curtain and watching all of this, Soto is kind of quizzing them about the way that they are interpreting what they're seeing. And essentially, Soto is watching Timu not get it. And it feels, it's clear, a little bit sorry for him because it's so obvious that this kid is not up to the task. And if he does get chosen, he is going to be taken advantage of. Like, there are just so many people who will be able to run this kid in circles because he doesn't know any better. And even if he has his brother and sisters by his side, he could grow eventually suspicious of their advice. If somebody is a good manipulator, they can turn him against his own kin and they won't be listened to anymore. So yeah, it's just, and I love Thera being really sorry for the kid who's making this presentation, that he has his one chance of a lifetime to get in front of the emperor and say something. And he just blows it so badly by saying all of this without giving any thought to who Kuni actually is and how he got where he is. And it's pretty clear Kuni grants this kid a position in the government, but it is not a position that this kid was hoping for or that has anything to do with the presentation he just made. So it's kind of like Kuni is doing what he knows he has to because of how far the kid has come in the proceedings, but does not respect the work or the presentation or the argument at all. And it's just kind of humiliating. So yeah, it's rough. And they also spot Zomi out there. So we know that she eventually gets to this point, and I'm dying to know what the fuck her presentation is going to be. I can't wait. And I have great faith that Kuni will be receptive because he is like that. We'll see what she says and how far she pushes the envelope, but that remains to be seen. And also, and I'm over time here, but I have to say this part. There is this amazing, like, what's the word I want? Subtext to the presentation that Kita made, which is that the fact that Kita is coming up here and sharing this is an indication that nobles are getting restless and are unhappy with the way that Kuni has chosen to run things and parcel stuff out. And when Kuni made the joke after the presentation of, I will tell it to my daughter as I tuck her in tonight, which is what he was saying is, this is an adorable little fairy tale that is certainly never going to happen. He was watching to see who laughed. And it wasn't the reaction of Kita that he cared about. It was the other nobles in the audience. And whomever laughed, he would know were on his side, basically, who were also people who do not take this seriously. But those who did not laugh were people who had a vested interest in this kid's argument and were going to be maybe a problem potentially. And again, poor Timu just doesn't understand this. And he says something like, I don't think we should be discussing such things because it's, talking about potential treason. Soto looked at him pityingly. What if the emperor makes you crown prince? Then it would be your job to think about such things. And that is the end of chapter 11. So yeah, Timu, buddy, get it together. You need to do better. All right, I'm going to wrap, but thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again to Kyle for coming into the chat and hanging out with me. I hope that you all enjoy the episode, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new one. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.